Hey, folks, welcome back. The episode today, I was thinking about it as I take you on this journey through Silicon Valley. I know sometimes it gets a little bit law and order ish. That is, law and order, there's, basically two groups, right? There's the prosecutors and the police. That's the criminal justice system. And we do that a little bit in Silicon Valley on these podcasts, right? Sometimes it's like, well, there's the VCs and the entrepreneurs, and that's true. But there's something else in Silicon Valley that is a force that controls $10 billion dollars that touches almost every aspect of Silicon Valley from Oakland all the way down to San Jose, and that is the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. The Silicon Valley Community Foundation controls about $10 billion dollars, and it's growing rapidly. Um, and if you don't know what they are, let me try to frame this for you kind of simply. And I'm sure I'm not doing a perfect job here, but imagine you've become wealthy in Silicon Valley. And I know for a lot of you, you don't need to imagine. I know a lot of those of you who listen have been at the right company at the right time, and things have changed in your life financially. So let's say you become incredibly wealthy, and you say, "Hey, I want to give back to my community." Let's say you decide that you care about Black Lives Matter, and you've done your tweet. Great, good job. And assuming your tweet hasn't ended racism in our time, you say, "Hey, I want to give some money to this cause." Do you know how to do that? Do you know who to give your money to? Do you know that in Oakland there's an organization that deals with the biggest issue in black education, which is uh, kids exit in the eighth grade for whatever reason? I'm not exactly making this up, but I'm sure I'm not saying it precisely. Well, say there's an organization in Oakland that actually focuses on keeping black kids in eighth grade, and that has transformative effects on their lives. Do you know how to find that organization? Do you know if that organization exists? Well, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation does, SVCF. Now imagine running that foundation where you're funneling literally 10 billion or more dollars into the community um, during Black Lives Matter. Um, they are the ones who you go to if you say, "Hey, I want to do good in the community, but I've spent the last 5, 10 years of my life working at Google, and I don't know. I don't know which causes, which poverty and education and arts, which things need money." Well, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation does. Now, imagine you're running that organization with all those competing interests during COVID and during the emergence of Black Lives Matter. Well, you don't need to imagine that because my guest today is Nicole Taylor. She is the CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Here she is. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something About Your podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Nicole Taylor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
So thank you so much for doing this. We talk a lot about the pieces of Silicon Valley on this podcast. There's the venture capitalists, and there's the, kind of the stars of the show, the entrepreneurs. There's people getting wealthy, the whole kind of milieu of Silicon Valley. But there's another piece, and it's a big piece, and I'm not sure that many people know what it is, but it's not the most obvious piece. And it's the Community Foundation. It's the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And that is the thing that Nicole is president and CEO of. And I thought it'd be great, we'll get to your background of sort of how you got to this,
Right.
but sort of what a community foundation is and what role it
Right.
plays in this world of like hyper wealth and
Yes.
kind of craziness. There's another thing, and that's what you do.
Right. Right. I get to do all the good stuff. That's
Exactly.
in this valley. At the core of it, we connect the resources with the need, and we facilitate that. We highlight what the need is. We also highlight what's great and what's happening and what's working and what needs to be further invested in our region. I think you're right. People only hear the hype about Silicon Valley. There are two valleys here. There's the hyper affluent, uber affluent, if you will, right? There's the tremendous wealth that can be gained. There's the incredible innovation. There's all of the companies that give birth here, and go global and the disruption, both in good and bad ways, right? The disruption that we have. That's one part of the valley. The other part is the vast inequity that is here because of the tremendous amount of wealth and where the jobs are. And we saw it in spades this past year with the pandemic. And that's what we do. We shine the light on, hey, there's a whole other part of this valley that we need to be investing in. All of us need to be investing in. All of us need to be owning that inequity and figuring out what works. Everything from how the housing, we can go on and on and on about the ridiculous cost of housing here, right? And homelessness and the people living in RVs. When you drive down El Camino past my alma mater, Stanford, you see all these these RVs on the side of the road. Many people think they're tailgating for the next football game, or they're not quite sure what they're there for. I'm like, those are working families in there. Those are parents with kids. Those aren't just people who are choosing to live an alternative lifestyle. Those are people that are living on the edge and don't have a permanent place to live. And when people come to this region and see that, they're like, wait a minute, what's really going on here? So we have the opportunity to highlight that and the people who are working to make a difference. The good thing is we have a hugely philanthropic community as well. And what I saw in this last year is the hunger for those with means to figure out exactly where they can be helpful. And that's where we come in.
It's interesting,
Mhm.
you talk about the inequity, and just to put this in perspective,
Mhm.
the foundation that you run with the team
Right.
and all that, of course, it's like $10 billion of capital that's getting deployed, like not just, I mean, of course,
Yeah.
it's invested and all that,
Right.
but being deployed
Right.
like on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And we actually a little larger than 10 billion now because I think people have stepped up. And last year, our donors gave out almost $2 billion, and that's the largest amount that's gone out. And in the past, we've had a reputation that it's going global, right? That
Right.
money's actually leaving the valley and not going, or leaving California and not being invested in the needs here. And we're actually seeing the reverse trend. We're seeing only 60 million went internationally, and we had almost $600 million stay here in California, with the vast majority of that, over 500 million, stayed here in the Bay Area. So what I'm seeing from when I walked in almost 2.5 years ago is a refocusing on people's backyard, right? What's really happening. It I'd hate to say it took a pandemic for people to realize what was really happening here, but it took a pandemic.
Well,
And
and the
and people
classic,
are trying to respond. Sorry.
yeah, no, the classic, like the cliche about
Mhm.
giving in Silicon
Right.
Valley is that people get really wealthy,
Yeah.
but maybe they're a guy who was a science kid or something like
Right.
that. And so what they want to give money to, or like Bill Gates, they want to give money to global health, and
Right.
they want to get, which are obviously
Right.
fantastic causes,
Right.
but there's the concept of like, well, people are starving, getting malaria in Africa, and then they're starving here and, on this
Exactly.
El Camino.
Down the street. Right. Yeah. And we do still have donors, of course, who are interested in global, efforts. We work with 60 companies and we help them with their excuse me, we help them with their corporate social responsibility work. Global companies have footprints, on multiple continents. So, that's where most of our international giving happens and grant making happens. But what I have seen in the last 2 years is this shift to people thinking local. One of the leaders in the corporate tech sector here, Chuck Robbins, CEO of Cisco, has been leading the charge on this. That hey folks, it's great that you want to help globally and you can do it. It's not an either or, it's an and we've got to take care of our backyard. And he's been one of the champions and gotten a lot of his peers to step up.
Mark Benioff in San Francisco
Absolutely.
does that, where he's like, yeah, global health is great. Let's make sure,
We're
we got
taking care of our
healthcare.
own. Right. And we're
Yeah.
taking care of our own. And again, because there's the wealth that is here and the innovation and how people think here, it is not a zero-sum game. It's not just that, one or the other. We've got to do both. And what I'm seeing is people are really stepping up locally. They can't ignore it anymore. They can't ignore the inequity. It's right in our faces.
Yeah, I've had an interesting. I mean, I live in San Francisco, so you
Uh-huh.
see the inequity
Yeah,
on the
every
streets
day.
walking
Right.
around. There's
Mhm.
also been another place that was unexpected, and it's taking Ubers. And you take
Yeah.
an Uber,
Yeah.
you're kind of in a bubble. You get
Uh-huh.
off the street, but you're in the car for half an hour. You start talking to the guy or the woman, and you're like, "Oh, you live in Sacramento, and you slept in your
Exactly.
car last night in a
Exactly.
Walmart."
Do this. Exactly. Exactly. And what I would do early on before the pandemic, whenever I'd go out to a restaurant, I there are not a lot of people who look like me who live in the valley who have the opportunity to do this work and make a good living and live with a roof over my head. It's people of color here.
Yeah,
It's been tough. So when I go to restaurants or I go to other places where the service industry was strong, I actually talk to the people who work there who look like me. And I do the same thing. I ask them, like, so where do you live? Where do you commute from? And they're like, Stockton,
yeah,
Tracy, Sacramento. They came here to work.
yeah.
And then the pandemic happened and the restaurants shuttered and the stores shuttered and the service industry, had to shift. And, all of those folks got hit the hardest. Not only economically, they're also not getting vaccines, and they're getting misinformation about COVID itself and how you get it, and they're getting misinformation about vaccines. I mean, so it's been like a triple hit to communities of color in our region, and that's the kind of thing that I get on my soapbox about,
Yeah.
and I tell people, and at first I thought it was going to be a struggle for our donors and the folks who made the Valley what it is. I thought it was going to be a struggle to talk to them about it and highlight for them what was going on. It was just the opposite. Again, there's this hunger now for how do we solve it? How do we actually? I mean, it's a shame that like if we can solve some of the things that we solve on our phones, right?
Right.
Why can't we figure this true social, like, economic justice situation? Like,
Yeah.
why can't we do it? To me, it's a will problem more than anything else. We have the means. We have, we can leverage public sector dollars. We can influence public policy, and we can use again our philanthropic capital as what you talk about every day, venture capital.
Right.
We can be the risk capital that public sector dollars, government dollars can't do. Like, we can help seed ideas, we can help grow ideas and scale ideas that work. So it's a great role. It's also really tough. you know,
Right.
I live in both worlds every day.
And so how do people come to you? That is,
Right.
they become like, so they're not, here's a thing that happens in Silicon Valley
Mhm.
is that people aren't wealthy and then they become wealthy and
Overnight.
suddenly,
Yeah.
yeah, they realize they can buy a house and some people
Right.
go a completely crazy way. But I think
Right.
a lot of people say, I've got to do something to
It's
give back.
exactly. Yeah. And
And
that's
I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to help them with
yeah.
that.
But,
How do they come to you?
it's true. And there's also two worlds of wealth here. There are the folks who do, extraordinarily well. And then there's the folks who've just done well in their lives. So actually, a vast majority of our donors have donor advice funds with us that are about $85,000. When I say that to people, they're like, what? I said, yeah, we probably have over 1,000 donors that have far less than $1 million in their funds, far less, less than $100,000. And they've done it over time and they've been giving over time. So actually, what I have seen is donor advice funds have democratized philanthropy. These people didn't have to go through the hassle of setting up a private foundation, which would have been really complicated. So between them and those who've done extraordinarily well, we offer this charitable vehicle that allows them to give back. Some know exactly what they want to do, right? They want to give to their education or the alma mater, or they want to give to the arts. They give to what they're passionate about. Healthcare became a big issue. civic responsibility and civic engagement this last year. Fair elections, a lot of people gave to that. But many times they don't even know how to start thinking about it. So they'll come to us because they've heard of us, they've heard of donor advised funds. A lot of times it's their tax advisors, right? Their financial advisors. We have some great relationships with some key financial advisors in this region. And as you can imagine, many of our donors have complex assets. Yep. That they're trying to figure out how do they convert these assets into something that that can actually be charitable and given away. So we do work with everything from cryptocurrency to public stock, privately held stock, to pre-IPO, to real estate. And we do that because that's the region we live in. Community foundations reflect the region they live in, right? And reflect their donors and reflect all the issues that that region faces. So for us, we had to develop the skill to be able to give internationally, for example.
And do you get the thing from the Silicon Valley guys where they try to reinvent everything? So they try to reinvent how to be a nonprofit?
Less than earlier in my career. I will say that. Less than earlier in my career. They do want to understand, many want to understand what's the return on investment.
Right.
And usually within a few years, they realize, we're talking about poverty, or we're talking about 400 years of systemic racism. Okay, so what are we really talking about in terms of impact? So those are some really actually exciting and interesting conversations, but they're not trying to reinvent things. I think they're trying to figure out what's working and how to double down on what's working, how to scale. The whole scale idea does translate over. How do we, not just raise a few $1 million? How do we raise hundreds of millions of dollars or target hundreds of millions of dollars to things that are working?
And how do you deploy capital at that? I've worked on nonprofit boards, the arts, and in particular theater. I went to Northwestern theater.
Great.
And
I was a theater kid, so.
I did that too. So then there's Theater Artaud is a theater in San Francisco that I was on the board of. And you get this thing in the arts, and maybe it's nonprofits, where people keep starting new things.
Yeah.
But they're so small. Like this theater, forget them, but just in the general sense.
In general, yeah.
They're so small that some nonprofit person has to figure out insurance, how to pay the heat, property taxes.
Right.
And that they probably should have just joined another
organization or something. Yeah. So those are conversations. And again, COVID changed everything.
Yeah.
Right. Because unfortunately, many nonprofits had to, figure out how to wind down. They just couldn't, they couldn't access PPP money, right? Or they couldn't figure out how to sustain. So the nonprofit sector did see a loss, right? For 2020. And it's hard to regain that, right? So it would be interesting to see what happens this year. But many times when we get folks who are really small trying to do something, we do try to do that matchmaking. We're like, I know you're working on this. Here are 3 other organizations that have been doing similar things for a while. You may be approaching it differently. Let's have that conversation to see, instead of you starting something new, let's see if there's a way for you to become a partnership, collaborate, something like that. A lot of times they just aren't aware, right? Because they're in the trenches, they're trying to figure something out. They may not be aware of other organizations that are trying to do the same thing. And there are economies of scale that can help. But there's also organizations that we refer people to when they don't have their 501c3, they're not an official nonprofit yet. There are organizations that will become what's called a fiscal sponsor. They'll take them under their wing, they'll handle the back office, and until that organization is actually ready to go on its own. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just doing a project, they realize they've done the project, and there you go, mission accomplished, right? So there are structures in place to help with that, but and again, we saw a lot shutter in 2020. So we'll see. We're still kind of have our ears to the ground to see what's really happening and what's going to happen with some of those smaller organizations.
I mean, I can't imagine with breaks my heart, the smaller like arts organizations, theaters in particular. I can't.
Right.
It's
hard. So one of the things that we did, we actually shifted our grant making. So we went through a whole strategic plan, and it ended right as COVID started. And one of the things that we had a commitment to is responding to the entire thing. We're focusing heavily on housing, we're focusing on economic mobility, and we're focusing on early childhood in big ways. But then all of these other issue areas, we knew we couldn't leave behind. So we've created like rapid response grant making for these smaller organizations. We're giving out $30,000 to a small organization. That's like that can be pretty significant, right, in terms of them pivoting or building something. So that is how we're responding now. And we did it because that's how we responded with COVID. We created funds, we aggregated capital, and we gave it out to those most in need. And literally hundreds of thousands of people were helped in a way. And we made it easy, right? When we're aggregating the dollars, the individual donor, the person who wants to give back, doesn't have to figure out which organization is the best, which organization. It takes a lot of work. And but we figured out how to do it, and that's how we're operating. Again, that works here in Silicon Valley. In other communities, it may not work as well, but people understand that here. Oh, you're an aggregator, okay, and you figured out, you've done the due diligence, and you're basically distributing the capital out. So that's what we do. That's what we do, and that's what people come to us.
And how do you work with the other? Because as I understand it, there's a San Francisco Community Foundation, East Bay Community Foundation.
Right. There's actually 8 community foundations in the 10 Bay Area region, from Santa Cruz up to Napa, Sonoma, Solano. And so I've known Fred Blackwell, who runs the San Francisco Foundation. We've known each other for probably over 20, I don't even want to say how long. Over 20 years.
A couple years. Yeah.
Right, just a couple years. I've also known James Head, who runs East Bay Community Foundation, for probably just as long. So, we've all been in this field, either, government, social sector, nonprofit, or philanthropy. So we actually do quite a bit of collaborating, because we are a region, right? What happens in San Francisco affects what happens down here in the South Bay and the Peninsula. What happens in South Bay and Peninsula affects San Francisco, it affects Oakland. We have people who live here and have places in Napa, right? So Santa Cruz too, right? So we have joined forces. One key example is when COVID really started, we said, okay, we're going to establish a fund. We're not quite sure what the need is going to be, but at least people can give to us, and if we can give it to the CDC, we can figure out, because at that point, nobody knew what was happening. Right. We knew something would probably happen local. So we set up this fund, then everything, things started shutting down, and got on a phone with my colleague CEOs, and they're like, how are we going to deal? I'm like, let's make our fund a regional fund. We'll aggregate the capital. We literally our folks sat down, figured out a formula that was equitable so that people could get it, and, gave out $65 million that way.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So into this, while this COVID crisis is going on, we have Black Lives Matter. I shouldn't say it happens, but like George Floyd happens, like events.
Yeah,
happen.
Exactly. The murder happens in front of our eyes over and over again.
While everyone's at home.
Right. While everyone's at home watching, attentive, glued and in disbelief. Many were in disbelief. Many of us, it was like finally people are realizing what communities of color have been saying, but Black communities have been saying for a long time. So racial equity and social justice have become front and center for us, unapologetically. And the great thing is we're seeing their donors step up as well. They recognize they need to do something, and I get a lot of calls. Right? How do I think about even diversifying my organization or my company or my firm? Right? How do I work on my own personal path? And then what do I give to in the community? Like, how do we deal with this as a community? Right? We're dealing with that as a society, but how do we deal with this as a community? So I personally, as you can imagine, have been front and center on a lot of this, and our organization has stepped up and worked with other private foundations, community foundations, organizations to put racial justice and equity at the center right here in this valley.
And how does it, I had Charles Hudson on this podcast. He's a African-American venture capitalist, which is unfortunately fairly rare.
Yeah.
And I have lots of women and people of color on, and he said something about why firms might not hire black venture capitalists. He said, if you're a rich white venture capitalist dude, you actually know a lot of women.
Yes.
You might actually be married to a woman, but you might not actually have a black friend. Actually,
No.
it's possible in Silicon Valley.
Yes, it is very possible.
And
or they all know the same black friend.
Yeah,
not very many of us.
Exactly. Right? So how are they, on the financial perspective, reckoning as they see it and kind of go, oh, I knew it, but I didn't really see it. Now I see it. I've got capital. There's a foundation. Like how are people adjusting?
Again, there's been I'd say a few different responses. One, people are getting serious about diversifying their firms, right? And realizing, this isn't a pipeline problem. Again, it's a will problem. So their will is shifting. So they're actually thinking about reaching out, figuring out, they're starting funds, right? That focus on Black entrepreneurs, right? Or entrepreneurs of color, right? And we have companies and corporate leaders who are recognizing that there are ways that they can diversify their supply chain, which is great, but you have to recognize that you got to actually invest in those businesses so they even know how to be in your supply chain, right? So it's more than just opening the gates. It's like, how are you actually investing in these small businesses and companies? So that I'm seeing it deliberately happening and people trying to make it happen. A little slower than I'd like, but I'm an impatient person. Right. So, and in terms of giving and in terms of philanthropy, there's a reckoning there too. The biggest thing we did, again, with some peers who are in Southern California and up here in the Bay Area, other foundation CEOs, when George Floyd got murdered, we were on a call. It's a call of funders that are interested in supporting racial equity and social justice. They were like, we got to do something. We need a fund. And of course, it was like, Nicole, you know how to do this. We need a fund. We need to aggregate capital and identify Black-led organizations, identify how do we build the infrastructure in Black communities so that they can actually chart their own course, so they can actually get folks who can be successful and actually move the needle on all the issues that are facing the Black community. So we're raising $100 million fund.
Wow.
And we've got it's going to be a 5-year fund. We've got $36 million already raised. We've distributed almost $6 million of it to 3 organizations that are statewide that have 50 Black-led organizations in it. And it's about change. It's about how do you get to change. We're going to do the same thing with Latinx-led organizations here in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. And we're finding that people are like, yeah, I need to be a part of that because, again, you've aggregated the capital, you figured out where it needs to go. And for these folks who this is the first time of them really thinking about giving with a racial justice lens, we've done the work.
Right.
We've done the work. I'm actually making it easy for you to get in the game, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and which is really hard when you talk about race and equity, right? So.
And is there, roughly speaking, and of course it's never roughly speaking, but is there a lever, if you think about when giving to other things, you kind of know, I can imagine what you would do with people's capital to fight hunger, to fight the arts, to fight, just take an equity in the Black community. How do you spend money as a foundation on that?
Yeah. So the biggest, one, we've curated lists periodically. Prior to 2020, we would curate lists of organizations for our donors to give to. We amped that up in 2020, right? And one of them was a Black-led organizations giving guide. And we showed donors who are the local organizations really working in the Black community and led by Black folks. And that's not to say that there are other organizations working in the Black community that may be led by, white folks or the folks of color. We've been focusing on, again, building the capacity of these leaders, right? Who are leading in their own community. So our donors within like a month gave over $5 million to the organizations featured in this, what we call a giving guide. And it was local. There were some that working at the state level. And then, of course, there were some key national organizations that we pointed them to. So that is how, that is how we're helping our donors with our own capital, with our own endowment dollars, our own grant making. We can be on the cutting, we can be kind of on the cutting edge, on the leading edge, if you will, and investing directly in these leaders in their capacity. We can get rapid grants and out the door. And it was heightened with the Black community. And now we're also realizing what's happening in the Asian American community with the violence, right? Yeah. So we are now standing in solidarity with Asian American leaders and getting grants out to local organizations that are working in these communities and working to combat that racism that's now happening. And the amazing thing is we're seeing the leaders in the Black community and the Asian American community standing together. That hasn't always been the case or the history in this region. Yeah, there's been tension sometimes. Now they're standing in solidarity because this is just not right. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that we are directly doing. And again, there's some amazing organizations. A lot of people don't know because they're head down, they're scrappy and they're getting it done.
Yeah.
They're talking about police reform. They're talking about what do you do when guys come out of prison? How do you get them working? They talk about how do you get kids to be much more successful in school, get them support around, learning to code, learning, being on a path to becoming an engineer, being on a path to, really work out of poverty. So it's been an exciting year because people are actually stepping up. Now, again, I wish people were doing more. I wish they were doing it faster. I'm impatient and I see the need. But at least there's been movement, much more movement than in the past.
And what is your sense on the kind of crazy meme that Silicon Valley is over, everyone's moving to Miami or Austin?
Yeah. Well, in some of the conversations I have heard after what happened in Texas with their electric grid or lack thereof,
yeah,
it caused a pause.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it just caused a pause.
Yep.
Right. So I'm sure there's still going to be some folks who want to leave. Folks are concerned about more taxes and what that's really going to mean. My hope is that a significant number will stay.
Yeah.
Because again, with all of the amazing things that happen because of venture capital and tech, it's the other side of the valley that's left in the wake.
Yeah.
And it would be devastating.
Yeah.
If all of those jobs left and all of those companies left, if a significant number left, what that would really mean to the people who've been left behind.
Yeah.
So
I do think at some point too, it is sort of the capital city for technology in the world.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
You want to be in Rome in 100 AD. You don't want to be out in whatever province in Germany.
Exactly. My hope is that this is just another one of those, try to kill Silicon Valley, and still we rise.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? I have a friend who's been in, old San Francisco, you know what a great San Franciscan's like. And he's like, yeah, this is the 6th time it's been over. So he's
right. He's like, okay, we're like a cat. Yeah. 3 more lives in us, at least.
Well, there's a couple more things I want to ask you. What was your path here? You didn't just start out at the top of the.
No, I didn't. I worked hard. Yeah. I worked really hard. So I grew up in LA. I was the daughter of an immigrant. My mother was from Jamaica, and she came here in her late teens with a wealthy family that she worked for. And she had the equivalent, they're on a British system of schooling. So she came with the equivalent of 6th grade education and worked for that family. I was raised in that family, and we were dirt poor ourselves, right? Yeah. And she raised me with some incredible values. She passed right before the lockdown last year. And I know, thank you. It's I just marvel at like how she would think about my life today, right?
Yeah.
But her emphasis was always on education. Education was going to be our key out, and to work hard. It is common in immigrant communities. It's common in Black communities here. Our parents and grandparents tell us you just don't have to be good or do your best. You have to be better than everyone else just to get recognized.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely true, still true. I have to perform better than just to be seen as equal to you as a white man.
Yep.
Right? And that's just the reality of our country. And so I did. I worked hard. School came fortunately easy for me. I was one of those nerdy kids, got a full ride to Stanford, did both undergrad and grad school there, majored in human biology, thought I was going to be a doctor, hit chemistry, and I was like, yeah, this is gonna happen. So got my master's in education, started teaching. I did student teaching in Palo Alto Unified, and then my first real teaching in Oakland Unified in West Oakland. And
There's
that's
a contrast.
are you kidding? I was teaching science and I had everything at my fingertips in Palo Alto. I had nothing. I didn't have lab equipment. I had outdated science books. It was so that's where my zeal for solving inequity and getting at systems and getting it changed. And I fell into philanthropy in the mid 90s. Worked at the East Bay Community Foundation, worked my way up. I ran that foundation in between, ran some nonprofits. I worked at Stanford 2 different times as an administrator, ran the Center for Public Service there, came back and did some work in student engagement and worked at the president's office on some tough issues with students. Went to ASU, was dean of students for 73,000 students.
That's got to be a heck of a job.
I've seen everything. Nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing shocks me anymore. I've seen everything. And also worked there with the president on fundraising and got recruited to come back here, which is, I came here at 17, right? I came to the Valley in 17 and worked here for a long time. It was either this part of the Bay or Oakland. And so when I got the call, I said, yeah, I'll come back. Because I think this foundation needs to be a resource to the region in the ways that I've been talking about, right? But it can be the heart and soul of this region, if you will, and which was appealing to me, and that's the journey I've been on.
And as you look forward for Silicon Valley Community Foundation, there's theoretically a bunch of wealth about to pour into people's bank accounts as you name it goes public.
Right.
What do you see as you look over the horizon for your foundation as being exciting, optimistic?
Yeah. So I was talking to my colleague who runs the Seattle Foundation, similar kind of donor profile up there as ours. And we were talking about how we need to be over talking about assets under management. Yes, we have a lot of assets under management, and it's kind of like, so what?
Yeah.
Now what? And so he had talked about we should be thinking about assets under influence. And I said, I'm going to steal that, because that is exactly what we should be thinking about. How do we, as the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, start influencing and creating a region that is really effective with their philanthropy, has the kind of impact on the issues that are right here in our backyard, and can be a model like we are in every other way, right? That can be a model to other communities, that we can help really invest the capital that we have to these really hardcore, issues. That's what I see. I see is doing more influencing, and I see more people willing and eager to give to create change.
Well, I'll finish with a couple things.
Sure.
Let me ask about what should somebody do? You're wealthy, you're white, like things are going pretty well.
Yeah.
With respect to putting aside the giving, we'll finish with that one. With Black Lives Matter, what can people do? What would you like to see people do? I mean, there's the protests and the Facebook posts.
Right. One, I think giving to organizations that are working on the ground to create the change, and letting them do the work. Right. What I've seen is when an organization that's led by a Black person or working the Black community comes up for funding or asks for funding, all of a sudden they're berated with all of these questions that their white colleagues almost never get.
Mm.
How about trusting the people who are leading in their community in the same way that you would trust a white-led organization that's leading in their community, right? That's that's a shift. That's, like, let's get over our biases and really trust the leaders who are making it happen with very little in their communities. That's what I'd say. Trust them, give them the resources and trust them.
And so finally, how do people who are they're about to be wealthy, who listen to this podcast, they're about to be very wealthy. And
Right.
congratulations to them.
Exactly.
How do they start learning about Silicon Valley Community Foundation, following your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, one, follow us on Twitter, follow us, on just come to our website, info@siliconvalleycf.org. Lob any kind of question, and we will be there. We have staff that are ready to engage, really understand, what do you care about, and let's help you make an impact on the things you care about. I mean, it's actually that simple, and they don't need to overthink it. They really don't need to overthink it. They just need to act. Just start somewhere, and you don't have to start big. Start with $25,000. Start with $200,000. And let's get it to work.
That's fantastic. Get started. Thank you. Congratulations on coming to this position and all the good work you guys do. It's very cool.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks so much for doing this. This has been the Something Venture podcast. Nicole Taylor, my guest. Talk to you next time.